Okay, listen. Star Wars fans need to chill the fuck out. I watched this video by this dude named Robot Head the other day, how the character of Finn got destroyed by Disney and stuff like that. Literally, the first 5 minutes of the video is about Finn. The remaining 20 is about how much SJWs ruined Star Wars. Okay, so this guy's points, if he had any at all, were that because of SJWs, Star Wars got ruined in the sequel trilogy. And of course, he's one of those episode 8 haters, so he's just like, oh, General Holdo with her purple hair and her short bob cut or whatever, ruined Star Wars almost single-handedly, and all these people from around the fandom were praising Star Wars for their strong female characters in episode 8, and that was the beginning of the end and everything. It's like, bruh, I agree with you that the sequel trilogy did not pan out very well, but it wasn't because of Star Wars, it was because they didn't have a fucking plan for their story. They didn't know who Rey was for 3 movies. J.J. Abrams set it up so that she was going to be a nobody. And then in episode 8, Rian Johnson came in and made that an actual fact. And then J.J. Abrams came back and was like, actually, we're gonna have you be related to Palpatine. It's like, why? Why did you do that? So it's like, why are you gonna set this thing up and have this whole potential plot line about a character who has force powers and can become a Jedi without having any blood inside of her that would give her those powers? And then also, at the end of episode 8, you had the thing at the end with the kids who could do the force stuff, and they were just orphans or whatever, and it's like, oh, that's cool, there could be other force sensitive people out there in the universe. But no. Because they didn't have a plan for this trilogy. They just didn't. And that's what killed it. They brought in J.J. Abrams, who, mind you, is not actually a very good writer. So they brought him in to start this trilogy, and he started it very, very safely. It was basically, if you'd ever seen episode 4 in your entire life, you've seen episode 7. It goes by the same exact beats. You have this person of unknown origin on a desert planet. There's an inciting incident with a droid that has sensitive information inside of it. She teams up with the droid and another sidekick. Then they run into a mentor. The mentor takes them to where they need to go. The mentor gets killed by the presumed main villain of the storyline. And then they all escape and they blow up the big Death Star thing. It's the same freaking movie. Except now at the end, we are going to find Luke Skywalker so that he can teach Rey how to be a Jedi. Okay, fine. So they set it up for episode 8 because this was intended to be a trilogy, whereas episode 4 was not. Okay, cool. Episode 8 did not feel like a Star Wars movie. In my opinion, that's a very, very good thing because we had 7 whole movies and some change that felt like Star Wars movies. If you don't know what a Star Wars movie feels like, is basically popcorn filler where you're just waiting for the bad guy to die. Episode 8 didn't quite feel the same way. Episode 8, they killed the main villain halfway through, and then they set up Kylo Ren to be the main villain, which I was super excited about, because he was going off the rails. He was becoming so unhinged. He was going to be the big bad final boss, and Snoke was just a puppet, and Ren was going to be like, oh, I'm going to fight you and you're my foil because you are from nothing and I am from nobility and I am the one who is going to inherit this galaxy and I want you to be by my side. And then General Hux was going to be the guy who does the coup and is going to get rid of Ren, and he's going to take over the First Order, and then Ren will have to join forces with the Rebel Alliance to take down the First Order because they realized that what he was doing all along was not right, and that what was inside his heart all along, he was just confused and just lost, and he was being swayed by the dark side. And then you have other stuff with other characters that aren't quite as important because, in the end, only really Rey and Kylo Ren actually mattered. And then Episode 9 came around, And they brought J.J. Abrams back, and we know that J.J. Abrams doesn't know how to write endings for anything. And that's exactly what he did to episode 9. He Abrams all over it. Because in episode 8, Johnson made a big deal about Rey being nobody, which would have been fantastic. Because you know what that means if Rey's a nobody? That means that anybody could be force sensitive. And if anybody can be force sensitive, that means that anybody can be great. And that would be a fantastic message to give to a new generation of people coming into Star Wars in this new trilogy. It's like, hey, you, just because you're not born to rich people, that doesn't mean that you're going to be living your entire life destitute and as a nobody. You can become somebody through your own will and through your own training, and you can build yourself up and you can be all these great things and do wonderful, awesome feats of glory and fantasticalness. And then they just threw it all away by bringing back Palpatine in episode 9 and making Palpatine Rey's grandpa. So all of Rey's powers are because of Palpatine. And the reason Rey's an orphan is because of Palpatine. And the reason Kylo Ren's in the dark side is because of Palpatine. And it's like, it's all just Palpatine in the end. For the third trilogy in a row. I'm not entirely sure how you translate terrible writing and no plotting or planning to SJWs ruining everything. But it's pretty clear to me that people who were just watching the movies to watch them were just hoping for something good. And it's like, yeah, we were happy that there was more representation, like there's a female main character, there's a Latin supporting character, a black supporting character, and it's generally just more diverse, which is generally a good thing. But diversity doesn't do much when the writing sucks. And Episode 8 was my favorite Star Wars movie altogether because it felt like there was actually stuff going on. It felt like characters are actually growing and were actually like changing and things were happening and taking place and there were these revelations coming to light. And it's like, ooh, this is all a nice setup for what could be awesome in episode 9 if they build off of it and then have a huge payoff. And instead, what they did was ignore episode 8 and then try to make episode 9 2 movies crammed into one. And then they just had all the characters except for Rey and Kylo Ren not matter at all. Like, at all. And that's where it messed up. Like, yeah, there can be some cultural implications of what an audience, like how an audience responds to a movie. But I just don't understand why fans look at the downfall of a trilogy and blame other fans for it. I don't get it. Because the fans don't write the movies. The fans don't direct the movies. It was Disney producing it. And Lucasfilms, like, directing it. And Abrams and Johnson not having meetings about what was going to happen. Because Abrams wrote this script and didn't tell anybody what he wanted to happen. So Rian Johnson just took it and then did what he did with it. And then Abrams was like, oh no, I don't like that. I'm just gonna ignore it and make what I wanted to make. And that's not how you make a good trilogy. So I just wanted to expand a little on the last video that I recorded about how Star Wars fans like blaming each other for the downfall of Star Wars, basically. And I had implied in that video that we shouldn't be putting the blame on one another for what, Disney is doing. But that also doesn't mean that we should ignore changes in culture and what motivates movie studios to make the decisions that they do. So the original trilogy of Star Wars was made, or was started in the 1970s. So that was a very different time in America and filmmaking in general. You look at the original cast of Star Wars, and it is majority white people in general, Princess Leia is the only significant woman in the entire cast, and Lando Calrissian is the only significant black person in the entire cast, and pretty much everybody else is either not human or white and male. So coming into 2015, which I do believe is the year that The Force Awakens came out, we live in a very different world where representation is much more valued, and we want a wider variety of characters to be portrayed on screen as a protagonist. So we start off with Finn being the very first person that we see in The Force Awakens, and, you know, as you all know, he's a black man. So we kind of get the sense that he's going to be a very significant character. Spoiler alert, turns out he's probably one of the most unimportant characters in the entire trilogy, unfortunately. In episode 8, we get another significant female character in Holdo, and yet another significant female character who is also non-white in Rose Tico. Disney's relationship with the changing cultural tide, particularly of America, is, I will freely admit, questionable at best. Disney is a gigantic corporation that is laser focused on marketability. And the one thing that they are able to market the most is feminism. Because women being capable is not a very radical idea. You know, women being able to do whatever they want, being able to be powerful on their own and being able to just do things is a very easy thing to sell. Disney's handling of feminism is not good. Especially lately. I want to say particularly lately, as a matter of fact. Because if you look back at the Renaissance era of Disney movies, the animations of the 1990s and like late 80s, yes, some of those movies were kind of questionable, you know, in today's lens, but some of them were also like really freaking good. Like, compare the 90s Aladdin to the 2019 Aladdin. They are very different movies, especially when it comes to Princess Jasmine. In the 90s Aladdin, Princess Jasmine just existed, and she was awesome. She was one of probably the best female characters that Disney ever created. And yeah, she had to go through some stuff that is kind of stereotypical for female characters to have to go through. Like, she was being perved on by Jafar, and he was being like, oh, I'm gonna marry you and stuff. Keep in mind, Jasmine is like the youngest princess. She's like 14. And she was like weirdly sexualized at times and things like that. But the way that she was written was genuinely pretty damn good. As far as, you know, creating a feminist character. Especially for the time. Like, she was rather independent. She was never afraid to speak her mind. She was very outspoken, and she just like, she felt like a person, you know? And then you get to the 2019 version of Aladdin, where they make it a point. They make it a very large point that she is supposed to be second string to the men in her society. Like, her father doesn't listen to her. She talks about not wanting to be silenced multiple times throughout the movie, yet she always kind of is. There's an arranged marriage thing that gets set up where she doesn't even get to choose her own future husband. And there's this whole fantasy play part where she's singing about how she'll never be silenced again, which is terribly implemented because it happens during a time where she's being taken away to a dungeon by two men, and then she starts singing this song that doesn't actually happen. So like, when she's singing this song, the two men taking her away just kind of disappear, and then she's walking down this hallway singing at Jafar and the Sultan and pretty much all the men in the room. And all these other guards are disappearing around her while she's talking about how she's not going to let her voice be overpowered by men. Then immediately after the song, she is once again restrained by the men, and then she gets captured anyway. It was a very strange decision. So that's one example of Disney kind of fumbling feminism. Another one is in Avengers Endgame. During the huge fight scene near the end, there is a nonsensical moment that just takes place. If I remember correctly, it's around the time where Spider-Man gets hold of something. Is it the gauntlet? I actually don't remember. Spider-Man is holding on to something that's very important. Captain Marvel shows up, and then she's like, "Hey kid, I'll take that off your hands. Leave it to me." And then Spidey's like, "Are you sure that you can handle that on your own?" And then completely out of nowhere, just from the ether, every single female hero shows up and backs up Captain Marvel. And then they have this like entire cut where you see all the women of Marvel doing their fight scene stuff. Except for Black Widow because she died. When she really didn't have to. As a matter of fact, Black Widow, the fact that they killed Black Widow instead of Hawkeye in that one moment is probably the most atrocious part of the entire movie. But that's just another facet of why this moment is questionable. Because even the Wasp was literally doing something else with Ant-Man inside of a van, if I remember correctly, right before this scene takes place, and yet she joins all the other women to back up Captain Marvel while they go and like kick ass just out of nowhere. So you have to also keep in mind that unless any of these women were in like a particular movie together, like if they were in Ant-Man or if they were in Thor or if they were in Iron Man, spoiler alert, none of them ever were, they have never spoken with each other a single time. Pretty much the only woman that spoke with other women, I'm pretty sure in the entirety of the MCU, was Black Widow. And they killed her. So you have all these women who don't know each other suddenly band together in this awesome girl power moment to kick ass together, and then they just kind of disperse. They don't know each other's names, they've never spoken to each other once, they don't have a rapport with each other, one of them was literally busy doing something else at that exact same time, and yet Disney was just like, girl power, we gotta do it, we gotta put something in there for the women. And it's like, just in a vacuum, that scene is really, really cool. But as far as writing and plotting and making sense, it doesn't. It just comes out of nowhere, and it's kind of a cheap way to get the audience excited about the female characters of Marvel, because they don't build up to it at all either. It just happens. So this is all just, I feel, indicative of how Disney handles the changing tides in culture. All of a sudden, they're thinking about it a lot, and they're trying to find ways to purposefully implement things into their movies that will create an inclusive, you are important, everybody matters kind of narrative a lot of the time. But as noble as that can seem to be on the surface, the actual execution almost never makes any sense in many movies that are coming out of Disney these days. So how this all comes back to Star Wars is I totally can see how Star Wars is something that Disney was hoping would just appease audiences. I'm not entirely sure that they were trying to appease SJWs per se, because there were a lot of things that could have been done a whole lot better if they were trying to do that. I want to say at the very least the two J.J. Abrams movies were meant to be crowd pleasers, whereas the Rian Johnson movie was meant to be a movie. And you can definitely tell by how different they are and how much of a schism there is between how people responded to these two different directors and their movies. Episode 7 was episode 4, and everybody loved it because it was safe and it was familiar. Episode 8 was nothing like anything else that we've seen out of Star Wars, and generally people seem to really, really hate it and thought that it was just SJW propaganda, like him just trying to force feminism and diversity and whatever into the Star Wars universe. Then episode 9 was back to the stuff that we liked because it was basically episode 6, but way worse because he was throwing away an entire movie's worth of content in order to make his finale that he didn't tell anybody that he wanted to happen. But I want to say it was largely, even though I literally just said in the previous video that fans blaming other fans is ridiculous and silly, the amount of backlash that came after episode 8 absolutely impacted what happened with episode 9. Like, it's very difficult to ignore that. Because episode 8 came out and people were railing against it. Critics really liked it, but the average audience member was like, oh my god, this sucks. They completely ruined Star Wars. So then you sit down to watch episode 8, and what do? They bring back Anakin's lightsaber that literally got destroyed in episode 8. Rose Tico basically doesn't exist, and she was the most controversial part of episode 8. Like, the character of Rose Tico was so hated that Kelly Tran got bullied off the internet over just portraying her. And then in episode 9, she all but disappeared. They brought back Kylo Ren's helmet. Kylo Ren's helmet was literally thrown to the bottom of an elevator shaft on a ship that got blown up. And yet they just reconstructed it in episode 9, and now he's wearing it again. For some reason. Even though when it got destroyed, it was supposed to be symbolic, and that he was no longer letting Snoke control who he was. I'm talking about Kylo Ren. They changed who Rey was related to. They changed the fact that she was a nobody, and just brought back Palpatine, an old crowd favorite, because we all know that you love Palpatine and you love the original trilogy, and we want you to love this as much as you love the original trilogy, so we'll bring back the original villain in the 12th hour, completely out of nowhere, in the opening crawl. And, oh surprise, Rey is related to him. Ah. So I think it's a combination of people want what they know they like, and they want what they're familiar with, you know? And what they're familiar with is the 70s Star Wars. And even retroactively, after seeing the sequel trilogy, people are like, oh, even the prequels weren't this bad. Which is like, okay, y'all hated the prequels until this came out. You're just trying to be contrarians at this point. Although I will say that individually speaking, prequel movies, not great. But if you take them all as like a whole, I think the prequel movies are actually very, very good. And it's in part because George Lucas made all of them, and he knew the story that he wanted to tell. So he had a through line, you know, through all the very weird dialogue and strange pacing and strange directorial choices and strange acting. He had a story that he wanted to tell, and he told it, and I think it was actually a really interesting story about corruption and government and what that can do to individuals, and how people on the outside don't see everything that happens on the inside, and how, you know, the people that we think are always good are not actually always good. And it helps us understand how people can fall to the quote-unquote dark side and join evil people who are promising them things that they have always desired, giving them a place where they feel like they can belong and things like that. I think that the prequel trilogy has a lot of really cool things that can be discussed if you ignore the generally terrible acting and dialogue. But the sequel trilogy is trying to just appease everyone, whereas George Lucas was only going out to write a story and put it up on the screen. He wasn't beholden to Disney. He wasn't beholden to the idea of he owes the fans anything. He wasn't beholden to the idea of like, this is culture and this is what culture wants, so this is what I'm going to give them. He was like, no, I'm going to make a story. I'm going to put it out there, and people will watch it if they want to. And that's that. But Disney is forever trying to be a crowd pleaser. Disney always wants to make the most money whenever possible. So they want to do everything that they can for every single person, and it never works when they consciously think about it. So I will probably have to recant my statement from before where I say that fans should not blame other fans. It's like, yes, I still generally believe that, but it's just because fans were so passionate, like, that this was the good way and this was the bad way, or vice versa. And Disney was like, what do? So they were just like, well, there seemed to, it feels like they looked at the people who were mad, because it felt like there were a lot more angry people because they were being much more vocal about how mad they were than there were people who were actually happy with episode 8. So they went into the Wayback Machine and were like, we're just going to pretend it never existed. We're going to take like maybe 3 things that Rian Johnson did in episode 8 and continue it into episode 9, and then we're just going to keep going from there. And like, there has been culture, present day culture, that has impacted those decisions that were made, and that does definitely need to be addressed. But I absolutely do not think that it is the fault of SJWs for Disney continuously messing up their stuff. Disney just does not know how to handle current issues. They're just not good at it. So blaming each other for this is not the way to go. You gotta blame Disney, because Disney has a track record of this. This is not the first time they've done it. It will not be the last time.